Welcome to one of the darkest times for our nation. Brother versus brother will fight in this war. Over 600,000 Americans will lose their lives. If you add up all the men lost in all the wars America has fought in up to Iraq, the Civil War still accounts for more lives lost.
I love this quote by Robert E. Lee. It is well that war is so terrible, or we should get too fond of it. What a powerful statement.
The war will last for 4 long years, from 1861 to 1865. We don't ask you to memorize many years, but this is one set of years that you need to have memorized. 1861 to 1865. Answer these questions using the graphs provided. Yeah, that's fine.
The war begins. This symbol stood for Union pride and was seen on recruiting posters throughout the North.
Why are we fighting? Let's review what each side is really fighting for. The North, or as it is also called, the Union, were fighting to preserve the Union. As Lincoln stated, no state can lawfully get out of the Union.
The South, or the Confederacy, is fighting for independence, self-government, and states' rights. We sometimes separate our slavery out as the main issue. It's important, though, to understand that it was much larger than just the issue of slavery. The South felt they had lost all power in the national government, and therefore the South felt it didn't have any other choice but to establish itself as its own country. As Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, stated, "All we ask is to be left alone."
Both sides believe they are right. They also believe it will be a short war and that they will be the winners. How wrong they both were. This war will last 4 long bloody years, from 1861 to 1865.
1861 to 1865.
In addition, both sides will suffer tremendously from this war. And as we all know, there can only be one true winner. The Union will win, but again, let me stress, both sides suffer heavily in this war.
When comparing these two leaders side by side, we would discover that Jefferson Davis has quite a bit more experience politically and militarily. He had graduated from West Point, a prominent military academy, been Secretary of War, and a U.S. Senator. Although Lincoln had little experience, he will quickly gain respect as a strong leader and a good military strategist. Being a good military strategist is going to become very valuable to Lincoln, since it will take him a few years to find a truly qualified general.
Let's review your blanks. Here on the left, you should have to preserve the Union, and over here on the right, you should have self-government. This should be a quick review for you. After South Carolina seceded from the Union, they attempted to take over a federally controlled fort, Fort Sumter. Major Anderson held out as long as he could. Unfortunately, he was forced to surrender.
These are the first shots of the Civil War. So that's your blank. First shots of the Civil War.
Here again are some actual photographs of Fort Sumter. We had these in the last PowerPoint as well. As the war begins, each state begins to choose which side to support. 24 states remained in the Union compared to the 11 that joined the Confederacy. 4 states lay between the North and the South, or 5 states actually. 5 states lay between the North and the South. These states actually were all considered to be Southern states, but they remained in the Union. These states were called border states. Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware, and Missouri are all considered border states.
Which of these border states do you believe was the most important? If you guess Maryland, you are correct. Why? Because Virginia had already seceded. If Maryland followed suit, our national capital, Washington, D.C., would be in the Confederacy's territory. Lincoln couldn't let that happen. He declared martial law, which means the military was in control of the state. He also suspended habeas corpus, which means that he was allowed to jail any pro-Confederacy supporters. Presidents are allowed to suspend habeas corpus during war times. Basically, it gives them more freedom to arrest and charge people of crimes without going through due process.
West Virginia is a new state that appears at this time. You see, not everyone agreed with Virginia's secession. In the northwestern portion of the state, people wanted to remain loyal to the Union. Therefore, they split off from the rest of Virginia to form West Virginia.
In many border states, you found loyal supporters to both sides. In fact, you found some soldiers who served for the Union and some that served for the Confederacy. Some border states sent representatives to the Confederacy as well as kept their representatives in the U.S. Congress. Kind of playing both sides, don't you think? This is why you find 13 stars on the rebel flag. They included both Missouri and Kentucky as part of the Confederacy.
Let's review your blanks. Here you should have 24. Over here you should have 11. Here you should have Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Missouri, and Delaware. Maryland was the most important border state, and border states remained in the Union. Here on this map, you can clearly see the first set of southern states to secede from the Union, and then the gold states were the second set of southern states to secede. The brownish states formed the border states. Here once again, you can see the importance of Maryland staying in the Union.
The volunteer spirit. As the war gets underway, both sides will call for volunteer soldiers to help fight. In the beginning, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers for a short 90-day campaign. Remember, both sides believed that this would be a quick war. This is evidenced with Lincoln only calling for people to serve 3 months. Remember, the war will actually last for 4 long years. What were those years again? That's right, 1861 through 1865. The North, obviously a little more desperate for volunteers, also offered a $100 bonus for joining the army. Later, as times got desperate, they increased it to $300. You see, not everyone agreed with the war. Some Northerners felt the South should be allowed to leave and be left alone. These people were called Copperheads.
The Confederacy fighting their war for independence. The Confederacy was fighting their war for independence. No need to call for volunteers, as they simply flooded in to help fight for the Confederacy. Many of the United States military came from the South. So after the war began, these soldiers and officers resigned from the U.S. military and joined the Confederate Army. Many of these were high-ranking soldiers, including Robert E. Lee, who will become the leading general of the Confederacy.
At this point, neither side is prepared to fight.
Yeah, actually I was going to use that later, but that's okay. Go ahead and say.
Okay, I've been given permission to just put a little side note in here that it was actually Abraham Lincoln will approach Robert E. Lee first and ask Robert E. Lee to head the Northern forces, to be the general of the Union Army. And Robert E. Lee will decline. Because he was a Southerner, he is going to stick to his Southern roots, and he will be the general for the Confederate Army. But I want you to remember that he was first asked by Lincoln to lead the Union Army.
And I don't think that Robert E. Lee necessarily supported slavery. I might be wrong in saying that, but I don't think he owned any slaves, and I don't think he necessarily believed that what the South was doing was right. But because his loyalty, again, to his state, he went ahead and fought for the Confederacy.
Remember, we have lots of sectionalism happening still, and people are really, really loyal to their states. And we see this playing out in which side people are choosing to defend. It's more defending your state in many cases than defending the issue.
Yes. Okay, let's review your blanks. Here you should have 90 days, $300, and then down here, the ever so famous Robert E. Lee.
And he really was a great general. What do you say?
Yeah, well respected by everyone, both sides. Okay.
Okay, let's take a look at the advantages from both sides. In the North, they had 4 times the population of the South, 22 million people, in fact. They also had 90% of the nation's factories. Why is this important? Think about weapons, ammunition, and other supplies that the military will need. The Union also had complete control over the nation's navy, including many private trading ships. This will be extremely helpful in building a blockade of southern ports. Having 70% of the nation's railroads will also be very useful in getting supplies and soldiers to where they will be needed. Overall, the North will have many useful resources, including farms, which will be great for food, money for the government that will help keep everything going.
In the South, they will have the benefit of fighting a defensive war, meaning they don't have to invade into the North. They can simply wait for the North to invade into the Confederate territory. Since the South was fighting for their independence, they had a psychological advantage as well. This is similar to the colonists fighting for independence. The fact that most fighting will take place in the South, the Confederates will have the advantage of knowing the land, the best places to hide, the best paths to take, etc. In the South, you found more people proficient at hunting and horseback riding. Since most of the United States military officers were from the South, the Confederates will be led by many great officers. Since so many foreign countries depended on the South's cotton, they offered help. This was known as the cotton diplomacy. Check out this actual photograph of Lincoln visiting some soldiers at camp.
All right, here's the picture. Let's look at our blanks. Right here it should be private trading ships. Right here, 70% of the railroads. Over here, knowledge of the land. And here, skilled military officers.
With advantages, there must be disadvantages. For the North, they were invading into unfamiliar land. As far as land area, the South was massive. Therefore, it was a long and arduous task to conquer and hold the South. I know, good word, arduous. The fact that the North had to invade into the South also meant that they had to get their supplies down to the South, which took a while. Since most of the military, including many officers, joined the Confederacy, the Union will struggle especially in the early days of the war. They will suffer many losses until finding a true leader in Ulysses S. Grant.
In the South, the lack of supplies will be a constant struggle. Not having many factories will cause them to struggle for weaponry and ammunition, as well as many other supplies, some as simple as uniforms and shoes. In fact, we will soon see the strategy of scavenging used by the South. Before they bury any soldier, they will take off any useful supplies. Without many railroads, it will be difficult for the South to get what supplies they have to where they need them. Compared to the 22 million living in the North, the South will only have 9 million, 3 million of which are slaves. The South will not have much of a navy, making it difficult to get past the Union blockade. Oh, let's look at our blanks. Right here we have large supply lines, lack of military leadership, few factories, few railroads, lack of a navy. I love this graph.
Here in this graph, you can really see the comparison of resources side by side. It is very clear that the North definitely had the advantage. Looking here, it would seem that the North should have won this war quite quickly. However, the lack of good military leadership will hurt the North tremendously in the early years.
No wonder Lincoln thought it would be over in 90 days. Based on this, I mean, look at that.
I agree with you. Okay, that's where we're stopping for right now.
All right, sweet. All right, so just hit this.